Today we're going to finish the Springback Visitors book. We'll start by putting the leather on the spine. Now if you've seen my other Springback video, you'll know that we have to soften the material at the head and tail of the spring, which is going to form the head caps. And we do that by gently tapping it with a hammer. Carefully work your way around until all the laminations or most of the laminations are separating. We want to moisten this and force paste into the laminations, a bit like rebuilding a corner. And once we cover it with leather, the paste will set a really nice solid head cap. Things to be careful of at this stage is to not ding the text block with the corners of the flat end of the hammer, not over wet the top of the spring. I probably do put a little bit too much moisture in. You do want to work the paste well into the laminations at the ends of the spring, because you do want this to harden up nicely to form a really strong head cap, because it is potentially the head caps that will take a bit of abuse in traditionally in a springback binding. So you do want that really to form back as a really solid piece of material. I edit these videos so that things move quite quickly. One of the things I've noticed from other bookbinding videos is that they can move a bit slowly. It can be a bit like watching paint dry. So one of my goals is to show all the detail, but also to keep things moving along. However, there are times when you do slow things down in reality. Two of them are coming up. I do this putting the paste into the ends of the springs a bit of time before I apply the leather to the spine, because I do want that paste to soak in. As it is, I probably let it soak in too much, or I put too much moisture in before I put the paste on the spine. But this is would have been stretched out over probably 10 minutes in reality, but I've sort of compressed it into a few minutes. For instance, I do let the paste soak in well to the spine leather, but that I don't show that obviously. Wetting the leather to give ourselves plenty of time to work is really important on the spine of a springback. we've got a heap of things to do. We have to set the groove between the spring and the boards, and that'll take about 10 minutes. And then we have to form the head caps. So now I'm doing the thing of using the best of both worlds, or hedging my bets by putting PVA on the spine and paste on the leather. And I also put PVA in that groove, but only where the lever is, because we want to keep those tabs free. I just put a little bit of a mark there to help me position the leather on the spine so I got the turn ends even. So just get it nicely positioned, flip it over and gently pull the leather down. You don't want to stretch the leather. And then we want to work the leather into those grooves. Once we push the leather down into those grooves and we've checked that the leather is even on each side of the book, then we will put the piece of sash cord around in the groove and then put that in the press, and we'll give it about 10 minutes to set into the groove. So we just wrap that around, not super tight. We don't want to damage the leather at the turn ends at the head and tail. Just do it up and tight enough so that you know that it's going to go into the groove correctly. Just put that on the edge of the board so that you don't squash the spring. Do the press up to a Goldilocks level, so firm but not too tight. There are different forms of head caps, but what I'm aiming for is sort of vertical on the outside and sloping in on the inside. After 10 minutes, I take the book out. I keep moistening the leather to stop it drying and the paste drying out. The paste I'm using today is a little bit on the wet side, but it's what I've got, so it's what I'll work with. I noticed that the leather was coming away from the boards a little bit, so I just refreshed the paste under there as well. And then we'll drop the boards, and with the text block mostly vertical, we'll open up the hollow at the spine and we'll be able to just turn in the leather with our thumb. Gently manipulate the leather until it's uniformly turned in and most of the wrinkles are smoothed out. Now I don't know how I missed it, but there's a little crease in that left hand side joint, and because I didn't work that little crease out, it ended up going all the way through to the final product. Luckily it's at the tail, and probably only another bookbinder will notice it, but it's a little bit irritating. To help form the head caps, I'll put a thinner piece of hemp cord around the book in the joint. Now this will hold the leather in at the top of the joints and also give me something to push out against to form the ears. But I don't want to do it up really tight. That if I do it up really tight, it'll pull the leather in at the top of the joints over the text block, which a little bit is fine, but you just, again, it's another Goldilocks thing. So the first thing to do once that is around is to pull out the ears. I guess that's what everyone calls them, or the people that have taught me have called them. And then to start working the leather. Of course, I'm doing the sin of rubbing wet leather now, but I can't help myself. So here I'm forcing out the ears on the sides, and then I'll start tapping that leather down and start forming that ramp in, and then I'll go back and make it vertical on the outsides. Many things in bookbinding you can do practice of. You can do a practice corner on just a piece of board, but forming the head cap at the top of a springback is hard to practice without a partially completed springback. So it is a bit tricky. You can see that the top is bulging out a little bit, and that's because I've overwet the top of the spring. The English trade binder Peter Goodwin talks about using the handle of shears to form the shape on the inside of the head cap. It's a bit of fun to try it, but in this case I wasn't having much success. The first time I tried it, it worked great. A little trick I learned sometime in the last year, and unfortunately I don't remember who I learnt this from, but it's a really good idea, is to use a thick piece of mylar to support the outside of the spine while forming the head cap. So it keeps the leather vertical on the outside and allows you to work the inside of the head cap. And while you keep the leather moist, you can continue to manipulate this and try and get it perfect. It's rare that you do get it perfect, but you'll always try and get it perfect. But at some point you do have to stop. In the process of doing the turn-ins, the leather usually pops up in the joint either side of the lever. Where the lever is, we had the PVA, which holds the leather into the joint well, but where it's just the paste, it tends to pop up, and I like to push it back in. So I put the sash cord back into the joint and then put it into the press. I like to leave it in at least an hour maybe 2 hours max. And then I'll take it out and put it on the edge of the bench and let the spine dry. One of the hardest parts of doing a spring back is to let the spring dry sufficiently before you open it for the first time. I like to give it a good 2 days. So the first time you open a spring back, unlike a normal book, I like to open it from the center so that the text block helps open the spring. It's fairly stiff the first couple of times you open it, so you don't want to put too much pressure on the boards. So that's why I open it from the center, as opposed to a normal letterpress book where you would drop the boards and then slowly open it from the outside to the center. Filling in on the outside boards is an optional step, but I do think it results in a really nice finished looking book. You may need to straighten up the edge of the leather a little bit, as long as it's only a millimeter or less, like in this case, then that's not going to be an issue in terms of the pared edge. If you had to remove more material than that, you might want to pare the edge very carefully a little bit. Filling in can be a bit of a fiddly process. The one thing to remember is that you can take it off, but you can't put it back. So if you're going to make an error, make it so that you've got some adjusting to do by taking a little bit more off rather than having to start from scratch. At this point, the outside of the boards will be super sharp, so I just ease them a little bit with some sandpaper. Again, I'd normally do this off my main bench, but for videoing, I'm doing it here, and then I'll give my bench a nice clean up afterwards. I want the cloth to overlap the leather by about 3 millimeters. So I'm going to measure in 3 millimeters, but I also want the corners to be even. So I'm going to measure, instead of going around and measuring in 3 millimeters from each corner, because all my corners aren't even, I'm going to find the minimum measurement that gives me at least 3 millimeters on each edge. So once I find that, I'll go around and measure that in from the corners. And then again, I want 3 millimeters. Now, I can measure from the groove or from the foredge. And I tend to do both so that I end up with a nice vertical line on the book. When I teach the case binding course, one of the steps that people often have an issue with is folding the cloth over at the corners. I've never really had an issue with this, but this evening my flow was just off and I was really struggling with it. And it was a really good learning experience for me. I had to work out a way to get this done, and I found putting a good weight on the cloth held it in place and made turning in these corners much easier. So if you do find yourself struggling with this, get a nice sized heavy weight and put on the cloth. And it fixed the problem for me, and hopefully it'll fix it for you too. As we get into more advanced projects, there's lots of little details that I would have talked about in the past, which I don't always talk about now. Little things like breaking the cloth over the edges of the board to make repositioning easier. Another little thing that I'll point out is how I've kept the book on that piece of foam so that when I move it around on the bench, I'm not damaging the leather. If you do see me do something that you don't understand, please just drop it in a comment and I'll get back to you. Even if it's an old video, it doesn't have to be the latest video. I do respond to comments of a technical nature for all my videos. If June, my old teacher, was watching me do this, she would be reminding me to stipple the glue into book cloth to get it into the grain of the material. For this particular cloth, Arbor Lathe, it's probably not as big of an issue, but it is a bad habit that I've got into. When I trimmed off the tabs, I'd mentioned that ideally you want the bevel to go over the turn-ins or the edge of the turn-ins. And on the lower tab, you can see it's short. It doesn't cover the turn-ins. However, the top one, the bevel covers the edge of the turn-in just perfectly. So you can see a good example of how much to trim off the tab, and it depends obviously on what your turn-in is going to be. I normally do a 25mm turn-in on a book this size. For this book, for some reason, I ended up doing 20mm turn-ins. So if I'd done the original 25mm, I'd have had too much on the one and probably would have been perfect for the other. I haven't trimmed out or filled in the inside of the boards, and that's because the paste down, or the outer end paper, is a made paper. So it's the marbled paper laminated to the white, and it's quite thick, and the turn-ins are hardly noticeable underneath it. So it would be a lot of work for very little gain. I'll put a fence or a moisture barrier at each end of the book, and then I'll leave the book in the press under light pressure overnight, and then I'll take it out and open it up and let it dry out open. I did a workshop last year with Michael Burke, and to add a little bit of decorative work to the finished book, he had us use carbon, and it worked so well I decided I wanted to use it on this book. And traditionally there would be some tooling very similar to this, but I think traditionally it would normally be done blind, though I have seen some where it is quite black, so it could have been just due to the heat of the tool, or it could have been done in carbon as well. This tool came from the Births, Deaths and Marriages bindery from the state government, and I believe was used on ledgers by them. So it is a very worn tool, but I was very keen to use it on this book because of that reason. This is a very simple process. You just wrap a bit of old-fashioned carbon paper. So that's carbon paper that uses a paper carrier, not a plastic carrier. You don't want to put a hot tool on modern carbon paper. And because it's just wax that's carrying the carbon, you don't need a lot of heat in the tool. I had it just off sizzle. And this is the point where I've realized that I've managed to run the tool upside down. Luckily it's on the back of the book, and most people won't notice that this pattern actually does have a right way up, but it's little leaves coming off, I guess, a stem, and on the back now the leaves are drooping down instead of going up. You can see that little crease at the bottom of the joint there. But otherwise, the book has turned out pretty well, I think. I've really enjoyed making this. I really enjoy making springbacks in general, and I'm happy with this result. If you've enjoyed my videos, please hit the big thumbs up button, and if you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button. And if you want to stick around for a few extra minutes, I've had a request to have a look at some of my less successful attempts at making springs, And I'll let you in on another little secret as well. The storage of my book cloth isn't very organized at the moment, and I store stuff in 3 spots. Who knew I had 2 reds? So that's the red that I showed everyone, and that's the red I ended up using. In the end, I think the red that I've used has worked out really well, but it wasn't the option that I'd given everyone to vote on. So here's all the failed springs that I've kept. I've done a lot of experimenting with different adhesives and wrapping in different materials. For a while I was trying to maximize the pull on the inside, and I'd use paste, and what would often happen is that as it pulled on the inside it would then delaminate, and it would often even just tear. I had a lot of problems with wrapping around the edges. I tried only wrapping on the inside and going around the edge, again trying to maximize the pull to the inside. I often made the shoulders too deep. Here's one where I've used paste and it's pulled off the inside of the spring. I'm not sure why it was so shallow. I suspect that I hadn't even finished with it and gave up on it. This one I think was rejected because the shoulders are too deep and the book would never have opened up. It was also extremely stiff because I was experimenting with thicker board. That one was too small. That one, the corners pulled away and I end up with those little hollows. That one, the shoulders are way too deep. So I've done a fair bit of experimenting, and I think I've still got a lot of experimenting to go. I want to play with using hide adhesive, and that one, the edge is really soft for some reason. I must have damaged the fibers, I suspect. That one's pretty good. I don't know why I rejected it. Anyhow, I'm sure I'll do more springbacks in the future. I've got one in the planning process, and that's a mini springback that will take this little prototype spring. But that's enough for today. So until next time, cheerio.